Hi guys, Ms. Osborne here again with the second set of North Carolina final exam review videos. Today we're going to be looking at the Revolutionary Era, which occurred from about 1700 to 1776. So as you watch the video, make sure that you're answering the guided questions that are provided on your WSQ. It's okay if you need to pause or rewatch the video in order to answer the guided questions. When the video ends, I would like for you to go ahead and summarize in paragraph form the main points of the video. On your WSQ, you'll find the vocabulary words that I want you to use. These vocabulary words are going to be bolded and underlined as we go through the video. Okay, and then I also want you to finish by asking one question. This can be something that you're so confused about, or a discussion question to bring to the class. The main questions that we're going to be answering that should be answered in your summary are: what are the Enlightenment ideas, and how did they influence the American Revolution? How did the British actions inspire rebellion among the colonists? So we're going to start off with the Enlightenment, because the Enlightenment is actually the first movement that occurred that influenced the American Revolution. The Enlightenment started in Britain and in Europe, and it was a movement that really focuses on a search for knowledge and the use of reason or logic. And one of the most famous Enlightenment thinkers was John Locke, and he argued that all people have natural rights that the government is bound to protect, right? And these rights are life, liberty, and property. Now, Thomas Jefferson didn't take these exact rights, but he edited them to what he perceived to be more American, right? And so in the Declaration of Independence, he actually said that all Americans have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Okay, and then another thing that colonists were influenced by is this idea of republicanism, right? That the government is based on the consent of the government, and that the government essentially gets all of their power from the people. So, like we had talked in our last video, mercantilism is really the favorable balance of trade between the home country and the colonies, right? And so the mercantilism and the favorable balance of trade occurs when there are more exports or finished goods than imports, raw materials, right? And they sought to export more things, and the more exports you had, the more profit you would make. The more you were importing, the more that you were buying. Okay, and so the British largely leave the colonies alone during this period because the colonies are giving them the goods that they need. They don't really pay them much mind. Okay, but the colonies end up taking advantage of this freedom, right? And this freedom to work out deals with other countries, mainly the French. And so the colonists kind of betray the trust of British. And the British call this period Salutary Neglect, right? So the British were neglecting the colonists and kind of leaving them to stand on their own. And because of this lack of trust between the British and the colonies, the British established the Navigation Acts. And the Navigation Acts try to control trade in and out of the colonies more so by kind of controlling the number of ships that are able to go and the kind of crews. They always had to use the British. So the French and the British actually go to war over to their claims to the land in the New World. They both wanted more land. They had a couple little disputed territories farther out between the Mississippi River and where the 13 colonies began. The British started pumping redcoats or their military into the colonies in order to fight the battles of the French and Indian War. Now, the British said that they did this to help out the colonists, right? But the colonists actually were required to house the British military in their homes during the French and Indian War, which they really, really did not like. The French had to give up most of their land in North America after the French and Indian War. The Indian tribes also participated in this war, mainly in the Midwest, kind of up in Ohio region. And the British, it actually leads to the British controlling land east of the Mississippi and all of the parts of Canada. So it gives the British a lot more power in the New World. However, the war is really expensive. Okay, and the British kind of blame the war on the colonists and say, we fought this war for you. And so they say that the colonists have to pay for the war. And the way that they do this is that they impose taxes on the colonists. So, looking at the pre-war boundaries and the post-war boundaries. So if you look on the left, you can see that the British American colonies really are just the East Coast. The land that's in the stripes is the land that is actually debated among the French and the British. The French had kind of owned all the Mississippi River, which was used as a major trade route. If you look on the right, after the French and Indian War, the British are able to control all of the East Coast up to the Mississippi River, and this gives them an opportunity to have more control over trade in the New World. So some of those acts that are established in order to raise money for the British. The first of these is the Stamp Act. And the Stamp Act requires a tax to be paid on all paper goods. And they essentially stamp anything that was paper, such as newspapers, letters, playing cards, sermons, anything that was printed on a piece of paper that had to stamp. And that stamp would indicate that a tax had been paid on that piece of paper. Okay, and the colonists are going to argue that the colonists had no representation in Parliament. Because they had no representation in Parliament, they did not believe that they should be taxed, right? They had this rallying cry of no taxation without representation. The colonists really wanted the same rights as the British, and they argued that they were British. They just weren't living in Britain. The British leaders, however, didn't recognize that they were British people. They thought, well, you know what, you decided to go to the New World, so we're not going to give you the same rights, okay? And they don't have a right to independence. So in an effort to continue to control the colonists and also support the British industry and that idea of mercantilism, the British require Americans to buy tea from the East India Company. Now, remember, the Americans were trying to save as much money as possible, and so a lot of them were actually getting tea from the French. And so the British passed the Tea Act that requires them to only buy tea from British companies. The colonists don't like this act, and they end up boycotting the more expensive British tea, and they refuse to let a ship unload the tea in the Boston Harbor. Now, some colonists, led by Samuel Adams, they called themselves the Sons of Liberty, right? And the Sons of Liberty was a group that essentially was trying to establish more freedom for the Americans in the colonies. Okay, so the Sons of Liberty dressed as Native Americans in order to disguise themselves, and they boarded the ship and destroyed all of the tea by dumping it into the Boston Harbor. And they called this the Boston Tea Party. In response to the Boston Tea Party, and the way to punish the colonists, primarily Massachusetts, because Massachusetts was the main state participating in the rebellion, the British passed the Coercive Acts. Okay, but the colonists refer to them as the Intolerable Acts because they felt like they were intolerable. They were absolutely horrific. So, and the Coercive Acts, the British end up closing the port of Boston as a punishment until all of the damages could be paid. Now, they dumped millions of dollars worth of tea into the harbor, so the colonists are not going to end up paying back that tea. So the Declaration of Independence is inspired by these Enlightenment ideas. The colonists had essentially had enough, right? And so they felt that they had the privilege of life, liberty, and property, and that these privileges were being taken advantage of by the British government. Again, this idea of republicanism, that the government only has power based on the consent of the governed, and they did not want to be governed by the British really anymore. They wanted more freedom. So the Declaration of Independence is a formal declaration of war to the British government, right? They had sent a couple different peace announcements ahead of time, the Olive Branch Compact, trying to create some sort of peace, but the British wouldn't accept it, and that led them to declare independence. So during the Revolutionary War, one of the main battles that you need to know is the Battle of Saratoga. Okay, the Battle of Saratoga, it convinces the French government to declare war on Great Britain and aid the Americans. Previous to this, the Americans had been kind of on their own, fighting through the help of militias. But these militias are not well trained. The British was much better trained and had a really big navy. Their navy was actually known worldwide, and so it was really important that the Americans get the aid of another power, mainly the French. Okay, and the French really want to help them because they are still resentful for the British for the French and Indian War. So the French and Indian War really set up the American Revolution and all the things that were happening. Okay, so the American Revolution ends with the Treaty of Paris, and the Treaty of Paris established the new boundaries after the Americans are able to win the Revolutionary War. Now the United States would stretch west all the way to the Mississippi, north to the Great Lakes, and then south to Spanish Florida. Okay, it's important to note that Florida was not a part of the United States at the beginning of the United States of America. Okay. America also agrees not to persecute loyalists, and these loyalists were mainly going to be in the southern colonies. Okay, and these loyalists were primarily loyal to Britain, which is why they were called loyalists. Don't forget to answer the guided questions. If you missed one, go ahead and watch the video again, pausing kind of where you need to. Once you feel like you have a good understanding of the video, go ahead and summarize it in paragraph form, the main points of the video, using the vocabulary on your WSQ and the bolded and underlined words. Go ahead and finish also by asking one question. That question could be something that you have a question about or a discussion question that you want to bring to class. Thank you for joining me for the second video, and we hope to see you again soon.